attending the event today, the webinar today about closing China operations, the dangers and challenges of closing a factory in current China. We've got a lot of material to cover and a lot of people who signed up for this. So the way we're going to handle today, we've got 7 parts of this, but I'm going to move through the first 6 parts pretty clearly about the introduction of East West and a webinar series, the introduction of the speakers, really in the current environment of closing plants in China. We've closed over 80 factories, so we have noticed a substantial change in the last 3 or 4 years about how much more difficult it's gotten. We're going to review our methodology and then 1 case study. And we're going to do that in about 20 to 25 minutes and then leave the remaining 35 to 40 minutes to answer the questions. So I've already got about almost 20 questions people have already sent in. One point of housekeeping is you can see the control panel on the right hand side, top right hand, and if you have any questions, you can send those to us and we will be able to answer those. You'll send those to us. If you go to questions, it'll click out the box, you type in the question, and it'll come to us and we'll answer. And if you have any questions which we can't get to because of time, we will follow back up with you in approximately 48 hours to get those questions answered, either verbally or written. So at this point, I just want to let you all know about the questions and then briefly introduce East West and jump into this event. So on our, as far as East West and who we are, we're an operational consulting firm. We're on the ground in China, Southeast Asia, which would be the Philippines, Thailand, Vietnam, Mexico, and Central America, and also Poland, and here in the U.S. So in those 5 markets. We are not lawyers. We're not accountants. We really do 4 things well on the strategic piece and the implementation piece. So we have 4 practices. The first is global manufacturing supply chain, and that's really looking at the overall global footprint. In this practice is where we do a lot of the plant closures, plant rationalization, plant divestitures, plant restructuring on the ground in China and other regions around the world as well. Second area we get involved in is operational, commercial, and performance, and that covers a lot of our M&A due diligence work, our turnaround work, and a lot of our work on the ground, working with offices in China as well as other regions where there is going in and doing assessments of them and trying to improve the local operations. The third area where we get involved is supply chain, and we pretty much do everything involved with supply chain. It's identifying suppliers, qualifying suppliers, supplier turnarounds, supplier improvements, identifying new suppliers in other markets outside China, looking at global transitions from former suppliers to new suppliers, all aspects of it, as well as investigation of suppliers. And then the final area is human resource and risk management. And there we do a lot of executive search for individuals in China. We also do background checks. One area that we're doing a lot of work now is interim general management work. And that's where we're putting our own managers on the ground in facilities like in China, where we've had executives leave or fraud and corruption where they've had to leave. And we had to put a general manager there while we found a replacement. So those are kind of the 4 areas of East-West practice. That is our expertise, is doing this, developing the strategy, but also the implementation of that. And right now, as far as where the 5 locations are, you can see we're in the U.S., Mexico, Central Eastern Europe, China, and Southeast Asia. We're currently have projects going on in all 5 regions. We're in Southeast Asia, setting up a new operation in Thailand, doing another one in Vietnam that are all being relocated from China. In Philippines, we're just putting in BPO practice. In China, we're moving a facility within China. And in Eastern Europe, we are in the process now of resourcing product that was coming out of the UK, resourcing that to Poland. In Mexico, we're also doing the same thing, just finishing up a due diligence. In the United States, we're doing a due diligence now for another client that acquired a U.S. company. So those are the 5 regions we played. Here are some of our normal client representative clients. We have a full list of our clients our larger list of our clients is located on the East West website. Okay, so the webinar series we have now, here's one we're doing. We have today's. We've got October 30th. We've got qualifying third-party contract manufacturers in Vietnam, Thailand, Philippines, Mexico, and Poland. And those are going to be actual case studies we've done for other companies to set up third-party manufacturers to help them identify and qualify those subcontractors and suppliers in those markets and the challenges we've got for each of the different markets and what the outcome was. But there'll be specific case studies covering that. In November, we've got one site selection for new operations and offices, and we're going to look at Vietnam, Thailand, Philippines, and Poland. We are going to be looking at BPO up capabilities in the Philippines and Poland. We just did BPO for another client in the Philippines. Both Philippines and Poland are good locations. We'll have the East-West representatives from Philippines and Poland on the phone and on the webinar. Then lastly, global manufacturing and supply chain footprint strategy in Southeast Asia, Mexico, and Poland. And we'll send out the invitations, but those three will be in November. On the introduction of speakers, we've got 4 very smart, talented people here today, so we're trying to move to them pretty quickly. I'm going to ask them each if they would take 30 seconds to a minute and introduce themselves. Dan, if you would start us off.
Sure, I'm Dan McLeod. I've been working with East West for almost 8 years now. Much of my career came up through an engineering and production management background, and starting in the late 90s, moved to Asia to oversee design and construction of facilities there, and stayed there for over 20 years in China and Southeast Asia. With an operations background, much of our work is around operations improvement, site selection, and supply chain development.
Thanks. Mark, if you don't mind.
Sure, yeah. Hello, my name is Mark Plum. So I've been in Asia really since 1990 to 2014, where I was president of Trane Air Conditioning in Southeast Asia, and then moved up to Shanghai in approximately 2000, actually 96, excuse me, and ran the Briggs and Stratton operation in Asia for 15 years. So, and then prior to that, I traveled quite a bit with General Electric, et cetera, et cetera. I've been with East West for about 11 years now, and my focus is primarily helping manufacturers if they decide they want to do a China Plus One, and helping them in Southeast Asia, having lived in Thailand from 90 to 95, and opening up Vietnam operations when the embargoes were first lifted. So that's kind of my background.
That's great. Thank you, Mark. Mark, I think you've got 2 projects down in Vietnam and Thailand, setting up operations.
Oh, yeah, as I said, yeah, we do a lot of work down there. In fact, I just got back from Thailand, yeah.
Li Xiao?
Sure, thanks. My name is Li Xiao. I'm based in China, Shanghai. I have more than 20 years experience now working with multinational companies, mostly American companies in China and Asia, especially in business transformation and also turnaround projects. In the last few years, mainly on merger and acquisition, restructuring, interim general manager. A lot of them are private equity projects, but also family-owned business as well. Most recently, because of the tariff and also geopolitical issues, we do a few projects on supply chain adjustments and turnarounds as well. Currently, also the Shanghai chapter co-leader for North America in ATTA, which stands for Asia Transformation and Turnaround Association. Very happy to join today's session and share my experience. Thank you, Alex.
Thank you, Li Xiao. Joe?
Hi, I'm Joe Slayton. I'm actually manufacturing director for a US-based manufacturing company. I have a fair amount of experience in Asia. I opened a factory just outside Ningbo in 2006, opened a second factory just outside Huzhou in 2010. And because of the geopolitical situation that has already been discussed here and tariffs, we closed both of those locations in 2023. And I worked alongside with the people from East West to get that done. So my experience with East West has been quite good. And currently I'm responsible for the operation of factories in Thailand and Vietnam.
That's great. All right, thank you, all four of you. So now we'll kind of move to the current environment. And as we've noted, we've closed over 80 of these facilities, and it's just gotten tougher to do this. I'm just going to hit some of the highlights of what we're doing. Right now, there are kind of four closures are going on within China now, right? You've got closing of a China plant. You've got relocating outside of China, as we talked about. We're doing it now in Vietnam and Thailand and Poland. You've got relocation within China, and that's primarily caused by urban sprawls. The factory may have been built in a grassy agricultural area. 20 years later, it's surrounded by shopping centers. And then finally, the downsize and restructuring. And kind of the five things driving it, obviously, the tariffs. There is a growing list of foreign exporters to Southeast Asia, Eastern Europe, the US, Mexico. You got manufacturing companies modifying their global manufacturing and supply chain footprint. You got the growth of Southeast Asia market that's leading to a fair amount of relocation to Southeast Asia. You've got increased domestic and particularly foreign competition in China. So you're seeing more downsize and restructuring. And then with urban renewal and urban growth in China, you've got relocation within China. We're in the process of doing that right now for another client. So if you're looking at China, kind of the five things that are driving all this and that are making it more difficult is you've got increased severance demands from the employees. And the employees know exactly what they are worth. They know exactly who's closed in the area. China's put in much more pro labor regulations, and they're monitoring that very closely. And so there's been a heavy cost to that. They are aggressively now, given the fact the economy is not doing as well, and the companies are closing in some cases, the Chinese government officials are being very clear about going back and making sure all compliance and tax and labor was all followed, and they'll try to claw back what was missed previously. There has been a rise in labor militancy, and that's really driven by the fact the economy is not as good. So people in the 40s and particularly the 50s as they're moving and 60s are moving to retirement, right, don't have the ability to get jobs as quickly as it was when China was growing during the go-go years at such high percentage rates. Now that's not happening. So there's a much more labor militancy that's there. We're seeing that in threats and sit downs, and we've had increased theft and fraud. We're seeing that in strikes going on, and then obviously much greater scrutiny by the authorities. And so here's just some examples of stuff we've seen in the last 3 years. It's getting the sit-ins are going on. So now physical security is much more of an issue than it used to be. We bring in guards for all of our plant closures. We used not to have to put as much of a focus on that now as we do. They're running. You do have cases where you'll see negative social media campaigns against a company, particularly if a company is pretty big in China. You'll see work stoppages, things you never would have seen in the past. You're seeing that, and we are seeing increases case of fraud and corruption going on in China, right? Which is why we're doing so much general manager work, because the economy's not as good and people are looking for outside sources of income, and the bonuses aren't getting paid as they have in the past. So here, briefly on the EWA three-part methodology, Li Xiao, I'm going to turn this over to you just to briefly explain kind of our methodology for closing all the factories we've done.
Sure, Alex. Pretty much we have three main phases. And the first one is project management and planning. And this is the most critical phase of the whole process, because we will need to spend large amount of time discussing with the client to plan the project, to understand where the risks are, where the potential issues may be. So these will spend 2 to 3 months together with the clients, going through different planning and draft communication plans for phase 2. Phase 2 itself is fairly straightforward to announce the closure and also implement it. This itself is very, very intensive. We will involve most likely legal and also PSB, which stands for Public Security Bureau, plus some other third-party security consultants to make sure that on that closing day or announcement day, we have a smooth process and make sure that all the messages are getting through. So the last phase, it's the mobilization and deposition itself. This is not that intensive, but it takes them usually the longest time, and could be 5 to 6 months, going through different authorities, and also making sure the assets and the other deregistration process are successfully done. Well, yeah, that's a brief description of our main 3-step process.
Yeah, thank you, Li Xiao. And I think the last piece is takes the longest, but it's the least intensive aspect of the whole situation. But you're right, that planning phase is absolutely critical. And point number 2, you've got to really develop a strong communication strategy, particularly now, and because it's going to affect, that communication strategy affects when you let employees know what the severance, when they know about the closure, severance packages, working with the Labor Bureau, working with the PSB, working with the Tax Bureau. All of that is so critical to get up front correctly. Okay.
Yeah, the whole process, needs a lot of patience. And that's why phase 1 is very, very critical to line up all the main milestones, keep every key stakeholders in line, and that will make the whole process much easier.
Yeah, 100% right. Yeah, and we find that there are a lot of stakeholders. It's not just closing. It's not just closing a factory. I mean, you've got a lot of stakeholders, including not just the employees, but you've got the business parks, you've got the government tax bureaus, all the government, Chinese government officials, who are all looking to make sure if you're leaving and you're closing, that they're going to get their pound of flesh. Okay.
Yep.
Here is just real brief. I can introduce a quick case study just to give you an example. This is a client of ours that had kind of an unusual situation. I'll kind of move through this very quickly, but you'll get a taste of it. They had a scenario where they were an automotive factory in Shanghai. We had to close the facility. Because of urban sprawl, they originally put into outside Shanghai, and it was a pretty rural area. After 20 years, it was urban sprawl, so we had to move it. The government was in a hurry because the business park nearby had some Chinese military companies were there, so they wanted this U.S. company out of there. So they gave them an order of a deadline of 10 months. There was $1 million fine to get out of there. And subsequent to that, there was no planning done, or planning that was done was poor. They made an ill-advised announcement. GM quit and a strike ensued. So we were not part of that piece of it, but we were hired to come in and do a turnaround, plant relocation and closure, right? To get resolve the strike, relocate the facility to a new location, get the new location built, and also operate the old location until we could have the new facility up and running. That's what we were hired to do, and we had a 10-month time frame to do it. To make a long story short, how we did it, we hired put an East-West interim general manager, like Li Xiao, in there to run the overall operations, and we also had a designated interim project manager to deal with the strike. And he got that strike, that was our first core focus, got that resolved in 26 days. So at the time we were trying to operate the existing facility, now we came out of the strike, and close it. And then the second, we had 2 strategies: operating that old facility and building up the inventory, working with our suppliers, getting product through there while at the same time preparing to close it. And the second strategy was relocating to a new facility. So in the new facility, we did the site selection, found a good location, found a good lease building we could get, begin to move that process in there with a deadline, At the same time, the old facility, we worked through the government to get through, they had some incentives because they had been there so long, and get through the liquidation process. And the end result, we were not charged, our client was not charged $1 million. We got it done in 9 months, and it was like a week or 10 days. So there were no government repercussions. They didn't pay the $1 million fine. We were able to get the work with the vendors to get them transitioned to the new location, get the product made, get it approved, automotive. So there was a PPAP process involved, and we were able to do it without any further strikes. And we did not able to get our product produced. And so our customer base was able to get their products and to them, excuse me. So at this point, we're now, fortunately, only got through this in the first 20 minutes. So now we're going to get to the really important piece. And while we've got 4 smart people on this presentation, we've got 18 questions lined up, right? And I want to be able to go through these. These are questions we've either A, got in advance of today, or B, questions we're asked when we've done all these plant closures. And so we're going to kind of work through. The whole goal here is that there should be a conversation going on between the speakers. If anyone has any questions they can answer, they can ask them. But this will be a conversational. So even someone starts a question, other people will jump in. And so of the questions we've got, we've broken them down into first is kind of strategic question on China decoupling. We're going to get into the nuts and bolts of notifying vendors, who are your constituencies, how long it takes, and then getting into more of the detailed aspects of severance, and then looking at this from an overall strategy level, and then as well as more detailed questions. So we'll start off today really with the first question around China decoupling and the trends that we're seeing there. Mark, I'd like to maybe ask you if you would start us off on that question.
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Alex. So as we all know, what's in the last 5-6 years, last 5 years, I guess, starting with COVID and then now through the tariff situation, that China has become kind of a global economic political issues are going on, and a lot of manufacturers that went to China 20-25 years ago, and it's really all they know. So now all of a sudden they're in China and they're saying, hey, what should I do? I wasn't here when we got here. I'm not sure where to go. So again, we'll get into more detail, but a lot of people are really kind of doing a China plus one. And again, basically, you keep your facility in China for domestic consumption, and then perhaps look for an alternate facility depending on where your markets are. If you're selling to Southeast Asia, you might be looking at the one might be the Philippines, Vietnam, Thailand. If you're selling a lot of your stuff exported from the USA, from China back to the USA, then you may want to look at Mexico, and we have a lot of resources there. And then subsequently, if you're also, and we had people that went to China early on because of such low labor rates, were producing in China and shipping to Western Europe. You may want to look at Central and Eastern Europe, where again, we put some facilities in. So you don't need to be a deer in the headlights. If all of a sudden you say, hey, this isn't feeling as good as it did 20 years ago, what should I do? There are definitely methodologies and models to assist you to do that. We'll talk about those later on. Some of the metrics you look for as to the country, as to the one. And then, of course, as Alex mentioned, if you're in China and you need to stay there because of your domestic consumption, then you can begin to look at other areas, maybe move a little further west. Take a look at some of the larger markets, Chongqing, Wuhan, and those areas that Chengdu that have really developed over the last few years. So anyway, there's a lot of different ways to kind of keep China for what is good for you domestically, consumption as well. But then subsequently, if a lot of your product is leaving China, there's good places to go and there's good methodologies to decide where to go.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Right. And Mark, I don't think we're seeing, or Dan, Michelle, and Joe, we're not seeing as many companies double down or add more suppliers, more manufacturing capabilities in China. They're really managing what they have, trying to diversify beyond that.
Yeah, I think all they're doing is the ones I know, the ones we all been working with. If you're clients are in China, then you just have to figure out a way to be more efficient. If your clients or are outside of China, then no, everyone is looking for alternative areas. It's not like 25, 30 years ago, I mean, as we all know, and it's really accelerated here the last 5 years.
Agree 100%. Dan, I'm going to turn it over to you to question 2 about commenting on the differences, the nuances of the factory downsizing versus full closure. There are quite a bit of difference in how you relate to the government, but also how you relate to your own equipment and personnel.
Yes, certainly. Thanks, Alex. So yeah, a couple of things. In personnel is first, and in this case, the challenge can be that to make sure the remaining personnel feel like their colleagues were treated fairly, and that the downsizing process was understandable, because these are the folks that are going to continue to run your operation there. So that first, make sure that you're communicating well and you're targeting communication on this group so they understand the importance of providing what is perceived to be a fair severance package. On a business license standpoint, there may be some advantages for example, if you're going to stop a manufacturing operation, there may be some tax advantages if you reduce the scope of your remaining business, focus on export or trading. That's a sort of a case-by-case situation, but it should be looked at. So yeah, there's an event here that would trigger a look at reclassifying your business and how you structure it. Government regulations, there's slightly different HR regulations if you're just shutting down an entire site versus a partial shutdown. But in general, as far as the severance requirements, notification requirements, they're not terribly different. So from a major standpoint, there's not a huge difference, but it's important to one maintain relations with the local government, which case keeping notifying them in advance of an event and keeping them abreast in what's happening and your progress towards that. That's appreciated, and again, it will pay dividends in your ongoing relationships with them. And then finally, around molds and tooling, most companies have horror stories about trying to recover equipment from suppliers that you'd paid for. Occasionally that happens. You've got a better chance of that happening if you've got an ongoing operation and continue to engage your supplier in some ongoing business. Otherwise, it's not particularly optimistic about recovering any of that. So, okay, Alex.
Fair point. Yeah, I think as we're staying on this, I know Li Xiao, question 5, you've already kind of answered around the 2-3 months at the beginning and of the planning, and then 2 to 3 weeks for the execution, and then 6-9 months of the phase 3, about how long it should take. But can you talk about, I mean, there are a lot of different constituencies when you close. One of them is indicated by question 3 is vendors, but you got business park, you got employees, you've got a lot of different constituencies on this. Can you talk to that a little bit, please?
Sure. That actually related to some of our strategies, how the company look at the supply chain over here in China. In many cases, that the supplier may actually be a very critical part of the whole global supply chain. So in that case, it would be good to prioritize these suppliers. So and make a thoughtful communication plan to kind of discuss or go through what some of the concerns, most likely the payment terms or some of the account payables, to make sure that they will get paid. And this is only part of our strategy in a global level. This will not affect the other global supply chain. So that's one of the point to prioritize these different level of suppliers. And also because suppliers can have a pretty wide communication network with other stakeholders, for instance, the industrial parks or even the tax bureau. So that kind of relationship building will help the other communication channel. So again, talking about phase one, our three-phase strategy to build up a robust communication plan at the phase one, which is the planning side, is very, very critical.
100%, 100%. And you do
So-
have.
I'm sorry,
Go
I was
ahead,
just gonna tag on to that was a real critical thing during the closures that we had, is when do we communicate to the vendors? Because if you communicate too early, you'll get feedback to your employees before you're ready to announce. So basically, you know, we communicated to our vendors at roughly the same time that we made the announcement and conducted the RIF. One thing we had to do is negotiate with vendors who, even though we didn't have POs, already had materials for us that then they said that, you know, we needed to go ahead and purchase from them. So you may need to be prepared with some vendors. If you are ending the relationship with them, they're going to want to negotiate what you pay for what they've got on hand, even if you didn't order it.
That's a good point, Joe. And I think because you're right. You really want to manage that relationship with the vendors, because we've seen plenty of cases where where vendors get upset and they'll come to the site, right, and make a big stink. And you don't want that at all, as you're trying to keep this information. And even the employees know, you don't want them that becoming a problem and them going to the government, making an issue out of something that shouldn't be there.
Right.
It's a really good point. They are a very powerful constituency. If we kind of look at, I've kind of got questions here on the next page. One is pretty granular, and the other one's more of a business optimization strategy. But Dan, why don't you talk a little bit about moving equipment? You've done it before, moving equipment out of China into other locations, and what's allowed, and how you IP risk, technology transfer issues are always pretty relevant here. So could you address that?
Sure. You know, a couple of things to consider when you're talking about moving equipment. So there, on the receiving end, there'll be two constituencies. One is the tax man, the duty authorities will want to place a tariff on that equipment that, you know, reflective of its market value. And then the second is sort of a more of a global economic policy that a country looks at and says, we don't want to be the recipient of old technology. That's, you know, we want to make sure we're bringing up-to-date technology into the country. It's part of our overall objectives. So in that case, those are two key areas you need to research and understand. And in one particular case in Vietnam, sort of an order of, you know, sort of a rule of thumb is they're not going to allow equipment that's more than 10 years old to be imported. And in many cases, essentially every case, you'll need that equipment to be inspected by a capable third party, certified third party, to you know, to state its market values for duty purposes. So that can slow down the process of shipping it, but it's essentially required in almost all cases. And so beyond that, it's whether or not that countries willing to accept older technology. On the IP transfer, certainly the risk of not transferring that equipment and know-how is you may have to replicate it in a new site without the manufacturing equipment that you use. So the ability to understanding both the equipment and the manufacturing practices, the standard operating procedures for relocating a manufacturing process, having that documented and well sorted is going to be increasingly important. And then finally, on the duty on the equipment, again, it would be based on the valuation that you've received, and so the duties will be charged at that. But in many cases, if it's a foreign direct investment that you're setting up in the receiving country, many of those duties can be on new equipment can be waived for that new investment. So it's on a case-by-case situation.
Damien had a question pop up here about a client asking about technology transfer. We've had to be involved. We've obviously seen that a lot before. The question was, have we seen situations where technology transfer does not work, right? Where you're going from China to the Philippines or Thailand or Vietnam, or where you had issues of technology transfer, that those that have worked and those that have not worked so well?
Anecdotally, yeah, we've experienced that. There can be cultural differences that get in the way, but they're exacerbated. But generally, is a company well enough documented with good systems in place, understandable systems in place, to be able to hand that to another operation, and it could be within the same company or outside and overseas. So companies that have solid foundation in understanding their technology and their practices have a better chance. Unfortunately, what we often see is that that's not the case. In that case, if there's a language and cultural barrier between the two locations, then it creates increasing difficulties, because it becomes more of a passing on the tribal knowledge and the oral and the know-how, and that you lose something in that transfer.
Yeah, and this is Mark. Yeah, one thing that kind of helps sometimes is it's a process. Say you move to Southeast Asia, Thailand, Vietnam, Philippines, what have you. You might continue early on to be using your same suppliers from China and then as you bring them in, and so then and then in parallel you're looking for local suppliers, but you don't do that overnight. Maybe it's an 18-month program where you're bringing the components in. And maybe even some of the people from your suppliers are coming down because they understand what's going on. They understand that China, as it pertains to shipping to the USA, is it's going to be a lot of top-down pressure. So if you have a plan and it's kind of an 18-month to 2-year plan early on, using your suppliers, if you've moved out of China, to continue to supply until you localize, or your suppliers they themselves may also move down there to follow you. So it's really a planning process.
Good point. Good. Well, Mark, if you would kind of tee us off on the whole idea of planning, consolidation, restructuring, that's quite a different, right, than just closing the operation, right?
Yeah, I mean, this is for those who've done this in the States or other places. I mean, consolidation is just trying to maybe take A and B and make 1 and 1 makes 3, so to speak. Things you have to look at is if you decide you're going to consolidate in China from 3 to 2, okay, where's your labor base at? Where's your component supply at? Which of the one that you're consolidating to makes the most sense? And you will know that yourself because you've been running these factories. And so you want to take a look at that. And then if you do that correctly, the government is usually on your side. I mean, maybe sometimes the provincial government maybe is not excited, but you're not leaving China. You're focusing more and trying to be more competitive and consolidate facilities. If you're, then you decide, okay, I've consolidated a couple, but I still have to look at another area because I can't do it all. Then you can look at, you know, other parts, Vietnam, Southeast Asia, as areas where I focus. And do you have multiple facilities down there? And what's the best way to consolidate those? You know, Joe, you've had a little experience with that in Thailand as far as consolidation. Yeah.
Yes.
You have some, you know, consolidating those three down to two. You may want to comment on that just a little bit.
Yeah. So in the situation that I was working in, we were actually eliminating a product line at that one of our factories specialized in. However, we did have employees that we wanted to retain and move into some of these other locations, as well as moving assets from the site that would be closed. You do need to work with, at least in Thailand, you know, you need to work with the local government authorities, because in our case, that facility was a BOI project, a separate BOI project, even though it was part of the single legal entity that is the company in Thailand. So you still had to walk through that. You did still have to deal with the vendors that supplied the materials that were used in the one operation but not used in the other operation. So in Thailand, it was not difficult. You did have to make sure that you dotted the I's and crossed the T's. But since we were staying also in the general region, we did not have many problems with respect to government agencies. We just had to make sure that we followed the rules, and there was a checklist of rules that we had to follow to divest ourselves of some of the inventory and things like that.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
That's a very good point. And you are doing some of that consolidation. As we're kind of moving through these, I think the for 8, 9, and 10, Dan, why don't you kind of help us on 8, 9, and 10, because they're all wrapped around putting together a risk management plan, right? I mean, we're seeing deaths, we're seeing strikes, we're seeing personal injury issues, we're seeing the need for more protective security guards. Can you talk a little bit about that as you're building out a risk assessment plan?
Yes. When we were looking at the closure announcements, well, first, normally what we have recommended is that we have an announcement and we hold that announcement off-site in an area that oftentimes is a conference room or ballroom in a local hotel, but an area that is a neutral site and that is relatively easy to, or relatively more easy to secure and manage any problems if they arise, and also allows security people to be able to survey in advance what and make plans for moving people in and out. These again, depending on the size of the operation, this could be a relatively small size room or larger for many hundreds of employees. But anyway, so the important thing is to plan for that in advance and survey where you're going to be making the announcements, and so that can be planned for you know, close personnel security if you have to move people in and out. Normally, an announcement or a process of an announcement where a company has had decent labor relations in the past, can communicate clearly what the reason for and what the severance package is going to be, and it meets requirements both by government mandate and what else is common in the area. You know, those discussions will go relatively well, but if those don't happen, if you don't have that history or that relationship, then we like to plan for that risk assessment in advance and make those arrangements.
Dan, I would just echo that planning, as you said, is critical. in the closure of our facilities, we went through a really rigid checklist to make sure that we had all of our documents in order, that we had thought of all this. And even whenever you make the announcement and you ask people to sign their severance agreement, you need to look at that like a manufacturing process, so that you're moving people through a process and then out of the location, rather than having a bunch of disappointed and or angry people milling around in a room. So how to communicate it respectfully, get them to sign the documentation if they will, and then out of the site where you're doing it, I think is critical to reducing the risk of a spontaneous crowd action.
That's a very good point, Joe, because the main thing is making sure that doesn't spiral out of control. But there are always going to be some that are causing problems.
Right.
Particularly as they get older, and then it's the toughest group.
So in 2015, I actually executed a RIF, not closing a facility, but I had to execute a RIF at one of our locations, and having people that had just gotten word that, you know, their job was being ended, milling around and being angry that they had been selected for reduction was actually a little bit more of a tense situation than a well choreographed and executed closure was. So it really is important not to let angry or disappointed people hang around in a group and consider how they should respond to you.
Yeah, 100% right. With that, then you get that mob mentality, and that's where problems occur. Yeah, and so the process we've got, as you know, get some moving through that process to try to get 100% signing as quick as possible. Talking about that, and talking about the employees and the concerns of how to manage that risk management, so much of that is around the employees. Alicia, why don't you tackle question 14, because that kind of leads directly into it, about when we let people know generally, right? There's a number of different ways to do it. We know what we think works best, but why don't you address that if you would?
Sure. Yes, this is also a very, very critical item of the planning, because that will, it's pretty much the T-Day, and then a lot of activities will be working around that. And in many cases, I have to say that we do notify the employees at the very end, because there's a lot of risk we try to avoid, and to make sure everybody's treated fairly, and we have enough time to plan all the necessary steps. But there are also some occasions that we may need to do some earlier notification, because the confidentiality may have some trouble, or some other channel may have heard or confirmed the closure. So we also can plan a kind of crisis management thing. So that's also part of the phase 1 planning thing, to make sure that we do have plan B. So make sure that we don't get nervous. We don't have employees knocking our door asking what's going on. So, but in general, we try to minimize the risk by having the employees notified when everything is planned.
Lisa, this is Mark. What's your thoughts as far as the location where when you make the announcement? Do you have any thoughts on that? Perhaps using a third area that's a neutral area.
Exactly. As Dan also mentioned previously, a third place it's always good, especially for a large scale facility. When you have 100 or more than 100 people sitting in one place, especially in our own facility, it's more difficult to manage. But if we have a third party place, it can minimize the risk, and we can have our own facility, our own assets under control and under management. That's a good question, Mark.
Sure.
At least, yeah, when we're notified, I mean, our approach is generally to rip the Band-Aid off as quick as possible. I know we've had lots of clients who will say, look, we want to give them a month notice or 2 months or 3 months notice. But we have found that to be generally not, that it does not end well.
Right,
I'm sorry, I think that you're right. I think it presents a risk. You know, we decided to, in both of our closures, to announce on the day of, to try to, you know, mitigate anyone basically manufacturing an employment issue or an injury or anything that might gain them some extra benefits on the way out. One thing you do have to be, you have to plan for is who you're going to have at the site and within your entity in China who's going to serve on your closure team, and how you incentivize them and retain them while assuring that they keep the information confidential. My experience is you got to make sure that you have people that are on your team are going to support what you're trying to do and understand, and then give them a pretty rich completion bonus for helping you with the closure.
right. Yeah, that definitely helps. That's a great point, Joe.
And we also use, I think, Joe, on that side, we use the security guards like we do every time on that closure, just to prevent things from getting out of hand. I think on that point, we kind of cover some employees, but there are cases where you have someone's not doing a restructuring, but they may have a trading company, a sourcing office that is there in addition to the manufacturing plant. So Mark and Joe, if y'all would talk a little bit marketing, but about how the effect of the closure is on to the trading companies, because so many companies are keeping their trading companies in China.
Yeah, I mean, and I'll go first, and then because I know Joe's had some experience with that. But most of our companies that we work with, if they decide to move their manufacturing out of China plus one, for example, Vietnam, Thailand, Philippines, Mexico, what have you, Poland, still have good suppliers in China, and they may, and some of those component suppliers may be shipping product back to the States or other places. So yeah, typically keeping a sourcing office there with 2-3 people is really very beneficial. And if you're a large corporation with different entities, having eyes and ears on the ground, looking for opportunities as it comes to components or raw materials still in China, it makes a lot of sense. I think we all know that China today, and it's probably going to be tomorrow the same way, it's still going to be the lowest cost supplier in the world as it pertains to certain things. Now, if you put duties and freight and that kind of stuff, maybe it levels the field somewhat. But just to say I'm going to leave China after, and you have suppliers there that have been developed over 10, 20, 30 years that are very efficient. Keeping a sourcing office there is just really makes a lot of sense. It'd actually be foolish not to.
Agree with that. The company that when we established our Chinese operation outside Ningbo, we actually established manufacturing as well as a trading company. The trading company actually dealt in more different SKUs than we manufactured ourselves because of all of the sources you can get for items that are not your core competency to manufacture in China. And so when we closed the manufacturing operation, we retained the trading company there. They still deal with a large number of vendors. Obviously, the new tariff situation affects that a lot. It means that certain people that were the lowest cost before may not be the lowest cost now, but there are still a lot of companies that are the lowest cost or they don't have an equivalent in Thailand or Vietnam because it's not physically possible for Thailand or Vietnam to displace all the manufacturing that occurs in China. We ended up having to consider our manufacturing company actually provided the labor and the warehouse space for freight consolidation that we did on behalf of the trading company. And so when that was closed, we actually had to look outside to find an entity that could provide us with freight handling services that we would pay for, as well as leasing part of their warehouse location, because our volume is not high enough to really warrant leasing a warehouse yourself and then keeping full-time people to handle freight. So you have to get creative in terms of how you're going to take care of the things that your manufacturing arm did for you previously.
100% agree with that, Joe. And they're good people in China can do that, and then some that are squirrely, right? Finding that right one, consolidate is critical, particularly since you don't have if companies closing operations, they don't have the same level of personnel they used to have. So as we go to final questions here that we got from the panel, there was one that just popped in. It was from, let me pull it up. It talked about the fact we've got a company on the phone here that is looking at India, and it was asking about how attractive is India for relocating factories from China, right? Is India receptive, or are there roadblocks? Would anyone like to take that initial question? I do know, just on anecdotally, right, we've got some clients been looking at India, but the tariff situations make them quite nervous, right? Because the Indian tariff does not look like that's coming down, and it's going to be settled at a much higher rate than originally was assumed. So there was a question around that. But Dan or Mark or Li Xiao or Joe, would you all like to take that question or have comments on it?
Let me just take a first quick pass. I mean, typical, the ones that I've known, the ones I've worked with, the ones I've been around that have been successful in India have gone there initially for domestic consumption, because of obviously it's India and it's large and it's automotive and it's electronics, and once they've established that, then they begin to look outside. To go there early on, and then as Alex just mentioned, with kind of the tariff issues, just as a place to manufacture, to ship out of. I have not, and have had a lot of successful experience with that. That being the case, as I said, most of the people that I've been around to work with, and I've traveled there a lot in the early years, a lot down into Pune, outside of Mumbai, and because the auto industry is quite strong in Pune. So if you're in the component supply, all that sort of stuff, it's a good area. But the ones that have been successful early on were the ones who went there to supply locally and then began to look outside. That's been my experience.
Very fair point.
Yeah, we relocated some manufacturing to India for certain steel items, and the only thing that I've noticed is we had a really good infrastructure in China to work with vendors, to do sampling, to do quality visits. If you don't have that when you go to India, you're going to need to find a way to support that, because like any other vendors, you need regular communication and visual checks and quality audits. We've had some quality issues out of India because we haven't had that.
Yeah. That I can see. Dan, did you have any follow-up on that?
Before Dan joins, maybe I can add on from person perspective. If we consider relocating from China to India, if there are management team or experts or internal staff going to transfer knowledge from China to India, the visa issue may worth looking at, and also how the China employee will get accustomed to India, and how they plan to visit and stuff like that, because that will make the process much easier if we have that plan to get the employees or experts transferring knowledge over there.
Sure, that's absolutely right. Dan, did you want to add anything on that?
No, that's okay.
Okay. On the as we're going through this, we got these three final questions. It's actually now 1 hour, so if you need to hop off, please feel free to hop off. we want to finish up these 3 questions that we were asked. So we'll drive forward with it. I get initially on Lee Schaff, you would talk a little bit about the government agencies you've got to deal with during the closure process, because there are a number of them, and hit on those, and that'll be a good lead into Dan's question on 18.
Yeah, actually, these two are pretty much connected. The most critical ones at the beginning will be Labor Bureau, because they will have a lot of say on the people termination. That's one. And Tax Bureau will be a very, very important authority to work with, because they will have a lot of say on the final liquidation process. Because if that's not clarified and we didn't work well with the accountants on that could extend the whole process for a very, very long time. And then Industrial Park,
Yes.
Industry Commerce Bureau, are all fairly important.
Particularly, Alicia, particularly if there have been incentives
Mhm.
granted and whether they've been expired or not. So, you know,
Right,
having
subsidies.
a
Yeah,
discussion very early in the process with those folks is important.
right. There may be some subsidies or tax incentives. We should clarify that also before the process is started.
The facility that we closed outside of Ningbo, we closed 2 facilities within 6 months. The one that was outside of Huzhou, the deregistration process went pretty well. We had to get them some documentation with the ultimate beneficial owner, but we got that taken care of relatively quickly, even though, as you say, it is the longest phase. There seems to be quite a bit of waiting involved. In Ningbo, the tax authorities have actually decided that they want to look very deeply. They have told us not to expect them to approve it very quickly. They're looking back at 10 years. And our company outside Ningbo had an A rating with the Tax Bureau and 0 issues. This appears to be a situation that Alex alluded to at the beginning of the conversation, and that is it's getting tougher to make it through this process. Our audit firm has told us that they're just anecdotally, our audit firm has told us that they are having to represent quite a few US-based companies that are closing their operations in China through this same kind of tax review.
Yeah, that happens in different region, in different province, and that level of difficulty may differ.
Oh, we just had another question pop in real quickly. Before we get to this question, Mark, would you talk a little bit about, we're talking about relocating some of the, you've got projects now throughout Southeast Asia, other parts of the world, just some of the in-country factors when we're looking, going to a new location versus comparing that with China.
Sure. No, that's a good question. So it's 7 to 10, major metrics. I mean, the ones we all kind of know. When we talk about labor, everyone looks at labor, but there's really 3 major components of labor. It's what's the cost of labor, what's the availability of labor, and what's the skill set of labor. So you got to have all 3 of those. And the one that's least important actually is cost. You have to have availability and skill set of good labor. Another one you really want to look at is there a domestic market down there? If you're going down to say Thailand or Vietnam, you're part of ASEAN, then all of a sudden you're part of 600, 700, 800 million people. So take a look at a potential larger domestic market. You look at tax incentives. Are there tax holidays for if you come and manufacture down there? A lot of the countries are really offering those because they want to get that business that's leaving China. You want to look at your components and your raw materials. Do you have those things there? I mean, those are all kind of things that everyone kind of knows about. But there's other areas you really need to look at. Transparency. How is it to do business there? Is your intellectual property secure? All those sort of things. You want to look at the corruption index, what's really going on there. You want to look at free trade agreements. You go down at in those, as you see it, just as of yesterday, with President Trump coming back, working on some deals now again with Vietnam and Thailand, and I believe Malaysia. So 7 to 10 areas that you really want to look at, again, from labor to markets to incentives to raw materials and components to transparency, corruption, free trade agreements. Those are kind of the things you really want to, and you want to weigh them and what's important to you and what's less important to you. So anyway, that's been our experience, and we've got a pretty good measuring system. And as Alex was saying, we've really got 3 projects going right now, 2 in Vietnam and one in Thailand, all based using those sort of metrics.
And if anyone has any questions about that, please feel free to answer, because interestingly, we're seeing the influence of Chinese companies in Thailand and Vietnam, and how that's affecting the ability to find, lease, and build the sites to build in those regions. We had one question that just came in. It was a question from a manufacturer here. It says, what about repatriating money out of China back to the U.S., specifically selling business or selling assets of the business, the land, the building, the equipment? Would anyone like to comment on that, about repatriating the money out of China and the ability to sell your assets of your business, the land, the building, and the equipment? Anecdotally, one comment I would make is that I know we are seeing a number of projects that we're taking on now are with companies that may be private equity firms, right? They're portfolio companies, or companies that are looking to sell, owners are looking to sell, and where China is not no longer the low cost sourcing it was 5-6 years ago, right? So we had a client now that tried to sell. They didn't get the valuation they wanted because they're one of their 2 facilities, one was in the US, the other in China, and as an acquisition target, the potential buyers looked at them and said, well, you got a facility in China, you got 55% tariffs on it now. We're not interested in buying your organization because China is no longer considered a benefit. So in that case, we're keeping that facility in China, but we're setting them up a facility in Vietnam so that they can tackle the China piece market, but they also are not dependent on that for their export market back to the US elsewhere. And so in some cases, having the China operation, interestingly, has negatively affected the valuation, negatively affected their ability to sell the company. But would anyone like to talk about selling the land or selling the building or selling the equipment?
In my experience, we sold the equipment from our locations. In some cases, we were able to get relatively decent value, such as injection molding machines and some of our punch presses and things like that. More specialized equipment, we ended up liquidating basically at scrap value. Doing all that, we did not encounter any significant difficulty. We might not have realized what we had hoped to realize financially from the sale of the facility, the equipment in Huzhou. Now, we leased buildings, so we did not have land or the building itself in play. We did have to settle with the landlords, but that wasn't too difficult. However, the repatriation of the funds that we have left over there, after we settled all the accounts payable, accounts receivable, made sure that we had met all the requirements for liquidating the business, it was at that time that tax authorities in Ningbo decided to hold us up and take a look. So we still have a pretty fair amount of money in China that we cannot repatriate to the United States until we get through this tax bureau audit and they issue a final decision on that.
Yeah, we're seeing that same thing, Joe. You and I've talked about over and over and over again. Those tax people trying to get every last penny they can before people leave. Mark or Dan, Xiao, anything you would like to add?
Sure. From my end, I think to have a third party, like a consulting firm talking to the authority, like industrial parks or tax bureau, may actually help the collecting information and collecting data, because for the client itself or for the company itself to talk to the authority, sometimes the Chinese, depending on region again, the Chinese authority may not want to directly expose or communicate what really happens and what's really the roadblock will be. So if we have a third party there to make the communication and to really understand what can be the issue, it may help the whole process to go through.
I agree with you 100%, Li Xiao. We actually recently engaged our audit firm out of Shanghai to be that third party for us, understanding that we may have to resubmit some documents through them, but we think it'll be more productive for them to work with the tax people rather than our local people that we still have on payroll to take care of that.
Right.
Thank you, Xiao. Thank you, Joe. I agree with both of you. All right. Well, look, I know that we are well over. We're just 11, 12 minutes afterwards. I appreciate people. I appreciate the opportunity to answer all the questions. We want to stay and get everyone's questions answered. But now at this point, I think concludes the event. I want to thank Joe Slayton and Li Xiao, Mark Plum, and Dan McLeod for all that information. I will say that everyone here is going to receive a survey. Please fill the survey out. You're going to get a copy of this presentation, and we'll provide you information on the answers. You'll get a copy of this and then be able to additionally sign up for the other future webinars if you would like. If you have any specific questions, please feel free to contact us at the emails provided, and we look forward to talking to you either in person or over the email. All right, well, thank you very much, and today concludes this webinar. Thank you. Bye-bye.